Welcome to An Author's Journey, where a prominent author chats with us today about their journey as a writer. Today's featured guest is author Tom Rogers, who is an accomplished screenwriter and a novelist. An Emmy Award winner, Tom Rogers developed and serves as executive producer of Disney Junior's animated comedy, The Chicken Squad. The series follows Coop, Little Boo, and Sweetie, a trio of young chicken siblings, and their trusted mentor, Captain Tully, a retired search and rescue dog, who team up on problem-solving adventures in their backyard to help their animated friends. A seasoned screenwriter, Rogers earned an Emmy Award in the Outstanding Writing for a Preschool Animated Program category for his work on Disney's Elena of Avalor, which introduced Disney's first princess inspired by diverse Latin cultures. His additional credits include The Lion King 1.5, Kronk's New Groove, Winnie the Pooh, Springtime with Roo, Tinkerbell and the Legend of the Never Beast, Cinderella 2, Dreams Come True, Lady and the Tramp 2, Scamp's Adventure, The Jungle Book 2, and Mickey's Once Upon a Christmas. He is also the author of 11, a novel about a boy turning 11 on September 11th, 2001. The book is taught in middle schools around the country and is carried by the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. And I can tell you that in my school, we've taught the book twice, and it is a book that kids truly respond to. It is easy to read, the message is clear, and the kids absolutely love the fact that it's realistic. It's not something that they can't reach out to. So, Tom, thank you for that. Raised in Dallas, Texas, Rogers graduated from Harvard College with a degree in history and literature. He is a longtime member, mentor, and supporter of the Women in Animation Mentorship Program. And he has worked with many young writing professionals to help guide them in their careers. He currently resides in Los Angeles with his wife. It is truly an honor to have Tom Rogers join us today for An Author's Journey. Tom, welcome.
Thank you, Joe. It's great to see you. I'm going to surprise you here with a little picture from our recent visit. As you know, of course, I was back in New York recently for a 9/11 commemoration ceremony on a rooftop in Lower Manhattan. And we happened to be doing our event against the backdrop of the tribute and light. And I got to capture this special photo, which I hope you can see on your screen there.
It's wonderful, yeah.
The lights were just coming up and the sun was setting, and you take a much better looking down picture than I do. I look like I'm half asleep. But we had a special event there. A lot of teachers got to join us and librarians. You guys got to meet one another, make good connections. It was kind of magical. And so thank you for being there.
The wonderful thing is the fact that you opened your arms to us, and there were just so many people there who wanted not to celebrate. That would be the wrong word, and I don't want anyone to get that impression, but to commemorate, to memorialize not just those who were lost, but the courage of those who went in there to serve, to take care of, and to address the needs of everyone at Ground Zero at that time. Now, I can tell you that usually we don't do this as a video, but today we may just leave this as a video because that picture is, it's wonderful that we can see those two blue lights, and the two blue lights standing for not just remembering and never forgetting, but standing for the courage and the fortitude and the effort and the cooperation of people who were trained professionals to do search and rescue work, and those who opened the doors of their restaurants and fed workers at 9/11, those who supported them at home, those who did things with them. That is a tremendous, tremendous salute to everyone who was connected to 9/11, to this great country, whether they were right next door to New York City or whether they were on an opposite coast.
Like
every
me.
single person.
use the
Yeah.
word connected. I mean, connection is something that I think it's really important in my book, and it's an important theme in the book, and it's something that I think was great about this event that we did, getting to make connections between all the people who are committed to maintaining the memory of this event and teaching about it to younger generations. But it's also one of the sort of takeaway memories I have from 20 years ago was how stitched together, how united we were as a country around this event and around our desire to do something to bring good back into the world after this terrible tragedy had happened. How it's hard, it's almost hard. I don't know how kids today would picture it in the kind of divided world we live in currently, but this country was completely united. And I experienced 9/11 from California, 3,000 miles away, but it felt like it was happening to my next door neighbor. And I think everybody felt that. We felt that this was an attack on us, not on a place far away. And we felt like that, to the degree we could be part of the solution by expressing our empathy and our sympathy, reaching out, donating money and blankets and, rescue dogs and construction equipment. I mean, the country really pulled together in a united way that we haven't seen since. That's one of those things I wish we could find our way back to without the tragedy to inspire it.
You found a way to tap into the spirit that existed in our country at that point, and you gave us something that we needed. We needed a book that gave us hope. We needed a book that could make us laugh a little bit, reflect a little bit, root for the characters a little bit, and to understand that those characters don't appear to be cut out of that cookie cutter mold that is sometimes taught in the $4.99 mail-in course. And I have nothing against mail-in courses, but I'm using that just as an example. What you did is you seem to have reached out and touched the heart and soul of a nation. You captured the feeling of a nation in that book.
Well, you're too kind.
I've heard it from others, and I watched my students both times. We've done this as a one school, one book, so everyone in the school read it. And we did it so it didn't happen one year after the next, because we have 6th, 7th, and 8th in our middle school. So we had a few years go between. And this was the connection. This was the way that our students were able to understand what went on, who felt what they felt. What was it like for a kid at that time? See, that's the connection too. You connected to the heart of a kid who, through your main character, is driven by the fact that he has this dog and he's trying to find the owner of the dog. And oh my gosh, he's disobeying. And what's he going to do? And it's issues that kids put up with every day.
Too funny. Would you, because I imagine some people haven't read the book and don't know about it, you want me to give a little 3-minute synopsis of what
Sure, would you please?
about?
Yeah.
Happy to. So the book is called 11. It's about a boy turning 11 on 9/11. And when we meet him, it's the day before his birthday. And he is desperate to get a dog for his birthday. And he finds out the eve of his birthday that he's not going to get one. His parents tell him, "You're just not responsible enough," which we've seen already. It's clear that they're right. And he kind of proves them right by throwing a temper tantrum. And he shouts at his father, "I hate you." And that's the last thing that he says to his dad before going to bed that night. And the next day, they get up. It's a normal Tuesday morning. His dad has already gone off to work. He drives a PATH train that takes him into New York to the World Trade Center. And Alex, the main character, gets up and goes off to school. And a weird thing happens midway through his morning, which is school is canceled. Everybody's sent home. They're not told why. Alex is supposed to do the right thing and take his little sister straight home, but instead he thinks it's the greatest day ever. It's my birthday and it's a hooky day. It's a ditch day. And so he sets out to give himself the greatest birthday ever. He rescues a stray dog to give himself the birthday dog that he didn't get. He plays baseball with his friends. It's feeling like the greatest day in the world until about halfway through the story, he finds out the truth about what's going on. Of course, this is Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. And the reason he was sent home from school is that the attacks of 9/11 had happened. And he immediately thinks about his father, whose train takes him to the World Trade Center, and he worries, is his father okay? Will I see him again? Or will the last words I ever spoke to him be those words that I said in anger? And it's all about then Alex going on this, it's a physical journey around, he lives in Jersey City, but it's also an emotional journey, growing up and realizing suddenly that he's responsible for his little sister and her safety. He's responsible for this dog that he has rescued, this stray. He is responsible for people that he meets along the way. And so it's a journey about Alex discovering sort of what truly matters. And that's the real shape of the book. There are other characters that we meet along the way, and it's a way for kids in middle school to get a sort of an age-appropriate introduction to the facts of that day, but also to what it felt like to be a kid going through something traumatic like this. And it's interesting. Recently, several other authors and I who've written, Gay Polisner is an author who wrote a book called The Memory of Things, and Nora Raleigh Baskin wrote a book called 9/10. All of our books deal with 9/11 in different ways, but we have all recognized the parallels between the pandemic that we're going through right now as a kind of a traumatic crisis. The kids are kind of slowly unfurling trauma that kids are having to deal with in the same way that kids 20 years ago had to figure out how they managed 9/11. And so, in some ways, maybe some of the issues that Alex is dealing with are relevant about feeling, where do we feel safe? What does home mean? All these kinds of things.
The decisions you made, I think, when you wrote that book were outstanding. And I'm not only the one saying it. At the 9/11 Memorial Museum in New York City, your book 11 is one of the best-selling books. It's a Kirkus Best Book selection. Moonbeam Children's Book has given you awards. Writer's Digest has given you awards. And ClassroomChatBlog.com says 11 is a heartwarming book about love, loss, and growing up. While it deals with the tragedies of 9/11, it does so in a way that is not overbearing, which makes this book an excellent read for students who are just being introduced to this unforgettable day in America's history. And I think that, as much as anything, says what you set out to do. And that's bring this tragedy into the scope of a kid who isn't used to dealing with adult issues. This was an attack on a country that was always considered to be so safe. And now suddenly we were afraid to go outside. We were afraid to go to an event where there was any type of a gathering. And it just brought some relief, I think, to kids who read the book and said, you know what? There's a kid in this book who's going through some of the similar things that maybe I've gone through, different situation, but yeah, I've had arguments with my parents. Yeah, I've done some things that I wasn't necessarily supposed to do. And I think that's the brilliance in your book. Now, I know that anyone listening to this, you're welcome, is wondering, when was the first time you said to yourself, you know what? I see what happened. This is a horrible, horrible time in America's history. I need to write about it, but I don't need to write about it for adults. I need to write about it for kids. And I need to make my main character a kid who's accessible to other kids. How did that all come about? How did you formulate that?
It's funny. It kind of came about. I mean, normally, we have ideas that kind of percolate in our brains for a long time. And if you had to point to a specific, moment of conception, you wouldn't be able to. But I have a very specific memory of where the seed was planted here. I have a nephew who was visiting with me and my wife out in California. in 2008, and he happened to be here on the anniversary of 9/11. And so I think we were, having our breakfast that morning. The TV was on, and there was news coverage of the memorial ceremonies taking place back in New York City. And he was looking at the television, and he turned to me and he said, "Uncle Tom, what's the big deal about 9/11?" And it's the kind of question, it reveals a lot. It reveals a lot about who you are, but also him. His question really took my breath away because it sounded almost sacrilegious. Those of us who lived through 9/11, that the trauma of that day sits right under the skin, and you can recall it very quickly. And most of us remember that day and, just minute by minute detail, where we were when we learned the news, what we did, who we called, how we wanted to get home and be safe with our families, and so on and so forth. But I realized, when I did the math, my nephew, Matthew, was only 2 when 9/11 happened. So he had no memory of the day. And, kids that we're teaching now weren't even born in 2001, but it was disturbing a little bit that he didn't know anything about it. And I asked him if he was learning about it in school, and he said he wasn't. That's why he was asking me. And I have friends who are middle school teachers, and I talked to them, and they said, no, we don't teach it. This is again 2008, so a little closer to the attacks, but said it's a really difficult and emotional thing for us to even talk about. And even if we did want to teach it, we don't have any kind of books that would help us tell this story. And I always think it was funny. My nephew, ironically, had come to California to interview a friend of mine, an old fellow named Andy Roth, who is now in his mid-90s, but who is a Holocaust survivor. He was one of the boys from Buchenwald. And Matthew was interviewing him for his school paper, talk about his experiences as a camp survivor. And Andy, my Holocaust survivor friend, is one of those survivors who wants to tell his story because they want to make sure that the world never forgets. And I realized, that's what happens. If you don't tell the stories, then you forget. And we are in danger of having a whole generation forget what happened, at that time, less than a decade earlier. And so that was kind of the thing that sort of triggered it, made me think, somebody ought to write a book for kids about this. And then I thought, who should that somebody be? I had never written a book before, a novel. I've been a screenwriter for over 25 years, and I've been a writer for Disney for over 20 years. And so I think that perspective of writing for kids and writing shows for kids and kind of learning to see the world through a kid's eyes, it gave me my kind of special approach to telling the story, because I knew some of the storytelling that had been done, some of the literature that had been done, and documentaries about 9/11. And the focus was on, rightfully so, on the events of that day, on the first responders, on the geopolitics. There's Lawrence Wright's book. It goes, deep into the, America's history in the Middle East and so on and so forth. I don't feel like I bring any special perspective to add to those kinds of stories. I'm not a first responder. I didn't lose anybody close to me in the events of that day, but I do have a sense of how kids see the world through a different lens. They see things very personally. They often indulge in magical thinking. They will blame themselves for something that happens, even though it has nothing to do with them, because that's how kids think. There's a different sense of causality. And I thought, this is something we haven't seen. And the more I began to research it, and was reading about how did classrooms handle it that day? Teachers had no roadmap for this. They now do, you do lockdown drills in case there's an active shooter, but nobody prepared for events like this back then. And so all the teachers were having to wing it. I'm sure you have your own story about that day. I'll stop talking in a second and let you tell that. But, it was interesting to think about, how did kids deal with this? And that was really the genesis of it. And thinking, well, look, I've been a kids writer for a long time. Let me take a stab at this.
That's a place that nobody had been before. at least not in the immediate past. The last thing that was even close might have been World War II in Britain with air raids.
Right.
But here we were in the United States, the powerful United States, that no one would ever dare invade other than Pearl Harbor in 1940s. And now we were having people terrorize not just two buildings and the people within those buildings, but an entire nation.
Right.
And yeah, the impact was tremendous. I remember we tried to keep a normal day that day just to keep things level for the kids. And still there were kids calling home and in a panic, and it was not an easy task. Not much instruction went on that day, but I don't know how anyone could expect instruction to go on a day like that, where you're worried about what's going on in not only your life, but in your family's life. And is someone who's working in the city coming back? Are they going to be safe? Where are they? We can't talk to them. We can't get in touch with them.
Yeah, exactly. I think some people forget, in some ways, teachers are first responders. You're required to put the safety and security of your charges ahead of your own concerns. And, teachers were on the front line that day. You had to hold the fort while, parents came to pick up kids and everybody else got to go home to that safe place we all wanted to get to that day. Again, that's sort of, it's part of the story that I felt like hadn't been explored. And I knew there was something rich there to dig into. And then it was just a matter of figuring out how to tell the story.
But you see, what you did, I think, is absolutely brilliant, because you put yourself in the place that we teachers put ourselves in every day. And that's pretty much in loco parentis, in place of parents. And I always tell the kids every year, I say, look, I am responsible for your safety. When we were doing the remote learning, I had to see you. I had to know you were there, that nothing was happening, because I'm responsible for your safety. You may not be here with me on site, but you're connected with me through the miracle of the computer and the internet. So I've got to make sure that you are safe. And then I try to make light of the subject to get the kids to smile a little bit. I say, in loco parentis does not mean that your parents are crazy.
Crazy, yes.
What it means is place. Loco is place. And we're in place of your parents. So any coach, any cleric, anyone who is in a position of authority or control or direction is responsible for you. The person taking you as a tour guide is responsible for you.
Yep. School bus driver on the way home.
Yeah, you need to be polite to those folks, and you need to treat them with the dignity and the respect that their position requires.
Yeah. Now,
I'd like to ask you one more question about 9/11. When you think back, 20 years has gone by, and it seems like, my gosh, that happened in a blink. After these 20 years, when you look back, what specifically do you think is the difference? And I have my own opinion on this, and boy, it's a strong one. But what difference do you think your book made in the lives of those kids who were reading it?
Oh, goodness. I didn't see this one coming.
No, I didn't either. I just kind of popped up. I'd ask this.
I don't know. And I feel like it would be presumptuous to say. I hope that, one of the things I talk to kids about is, they don't understand how much the world changed after 9/11, and it changed the world that they were born into, and certain assumptions that they make about how the world works are completely different from the ones that you and I had before the turn of the century. How we think about, like take airport security. airport security is this now huge, perhaps necessary, cumbersome process that we go through. Most of that didn't exist. Your parents could walk you to the gate and drop you off at a plane. The TSA was created as a response to 9/11. Don't know what happened on 9/11. How do you know why these people in the blue shirts are doing pat down exercises on people going through security? How we think about the military role in the Middle East, the fact that we've just seen headlines in the last 3 to 4 weeks about the American pullout from Afghanistan, which was chaotic and difficult. But we are only in Afghanistan because of 9/11. We went there as a direct response to what happened in these terror attacks. If you don't know what happened in the past, how can you possibly make sense of what's happening on your TV screen? How we think about privacy, very different, I think, from your and my generation to theirs. The Patriot Act gave the government enormous powers to spy is a loaded word, but to
Gain access.
gain access. Thank you. That's the right word. Gain access to people's emails and text messages and phone calls. Not that kids today make phone calls, but text messages. And the sense of whether or not those ought to be private, or, I think a lot of kids nowadays just feel like, it's all out there. I know people are watching. They have a very different sense of what's appropriate and what should be private and what should be public. And I think, we all sort of inherit the world we're born into, and we don't necessarily understand why it's that way. But at a certain point, as we grow up, it's important to begin to think about it, to examine things that we sort of take as givens, and to examine whether or not they ought to be givens, and whether or not we ought to treat privacy in this sort of cavalier way. And just to take one example, or whether we ought to be involved in these overseas conflicts. Again, I'm not going to get political and stir things up, but it can't be done without thought and context. And so I hope what it does is give kids a sense of context for some current events, for certain assumptions they make about just how the world just is versus why it became that way. And then the last thing I hope they take away, and we alluded to this earlier, but right now the political atmosphere in our country is so toxic and so embattled, and we have very few opportunities to join hands with those on the other side of the aisle. And we literally saw a joining of hands across the aisle after 9/11. Literally all 435 members of the House of Representatives and then the Senate stood on the steps of the Capitol all together after 9/11 to make a stand, make a show of unity and determination, that we were united as Americans, not divided as Republicans and Democrats. And that is an almost unthinkable unity these days. And I hope they see that as not, that kind of division, not as necessary or impossible to resolve, but, see an example from the relatively recent past when it wasn't that way. There you go. That's my takeaway. But, I also hope, look, it's a fun story about a boy who gets a dog and, and worries that he's done a terrible thing, and then, is doing everything he can to try to make things better and grow up and do the right thing and still have fun with his dog and spread kindness in the world. So I also hope, it's not just about learning geopolitics. It's also just, I want him to take away a good story about a boy who gets a lesson in what really matters and really gets a chance to become a better human being overnight. And so I hope they're entertained and have fun too.
I'm going to give you my take on this.
Please.
Because I think that what you did is beyond anything that you imagined. I see you writing this book, and the reception for kids, for middle school kids, for kids a little younger, kids a little older, and for the adults who read it as well. when I do it, some professional development workshops out with educators, one of the things that I do, especially if I'm working with pre-service teachers or I want to make this point to teachers in general, I tell them, think about the person who made you feel the most comfortable in your life. And if unfortunately you don't have one of those, then maybe think of that person you'd like to have. And actually pick this up from a mentor. When I first started out, Mr. Joe Burns, who then became Dr. Joe Burns, taught me this, and I remembered it and I've used it. So I say, think of the traits of that person who makes you feel the most comfortable in your life, and we'll jot them down. Then, and this is not psychology because I don't have that degree and it's not where I need to go, but think of someone that you just try to avoid for whatever reason. And you don't have to get into the gestalt and why am I doing this? And we don't need to know that. But just what traits does that person have that kind of put you off? And then do something else. First, think about that teacher that you had. You just look forward to going to that class. Whenever you could, you booked it there. You were there early if you could be. That was the place to be. Everybody wanted to be in that class. And write down those traits of that person. And then do the same if there's someone that maybe in your educational experience, hopefully not, but in your educational experience, you just didn't hit it off with for whatever reason. Jot down those traits. And there's a really good chance that if you take those traits of the people that were a little bit off-putting, they're going to be somewhat similar, but I can guarantee you that the traits of the teacher that you loved and the person you feel most comfortable with, those lists are almost going to be identical, if not identical.
Interesting.
And it's a comfort level. It's a place to be. And honestly, I don't want this to sound like a commercial, but that's your book.
Oh, thank you.
I see kids reading that book and I watch the expressions on their faces when they read it. And that's where you can tell the most. If you're getting blank stares, they're either deep in concentration or they're deep in discomfort. And you can tell the difference between the two after a while.
Oh, that's good.
But I like to watch the kids when they read your book, or if I read it out loud to them. Oh, that they thrive on hearing books like yours read out loud. Because I go back to Lawrence Perrine, who wrote the book Sound and Sense many, many years ago, and he based it mostly on poetry. But he said something that my mentor, Doc Burns, used to tell me. He'd say, you know, it's not just the sense of what you write, but it's the sound of it as well. If you're writing a courtroom scene or if you're writing a courtroom document, they have two different purposes. So they should sound different. They shouldn't be exactly the same. If you're writing a note of adoration to someone, or if you're writing a complaint letter, well, they're both notes and letters, but one's a complaint and one's of adoration. They shouldn't sound alike either.
Right.
There should be a distinct difference. There should be a signature there. And I think that's as much a key as anything. And that's where I put your book and your style. What you're doing in animation, my goodness, you're working with messages that nowadays we hit social emotional learning. And that's the big term, which has been around a long time, and emotional intelligence, which has been around a long time. But it's popular now, thankfully.
Yeah.
And social emotional learning, emotional intelligence is nothing more than, are you a good teacher? Are you a good human being?
Yeah.
Treat others with dignity and respect.
Yeah.
And that's what you seem to bring to the table as an author. And I find that to be admirable. So I'm going to do something totally out of character that I haven't done before with this podcast. Not only are we going to make this a video rather than just an audio piece, But what I'd like to do is have your permission to divide this into two pieces,
Sure.
because we've talked a lot about 11 and we've talked about 9/11 and that whole mission and intention. And I think to try to just jam in the animation part in a few minutes would be an absurdity, and it would be uh, an abomination to your efforts and your career and your accomplishments. So I really don't want to go in that direction. So I'm going to ask maybe one or two more questions, and then we'll wrap this session up as part one.
Oh, great.
And we'll reschedule for part two, because I know that as a middle school teacher and somebody involved in some activities, I've got a little bit of a schedule. Nothing, however, compared to the one that you follow some days. It's very long and over a long period of time, because the project just lends itself to that. And no one says, oh, it's okay, take a couple of months, don't worry about it. No,
Right.
the project needs to be out at the deadline. We've got to meet it. So
Yeah, but I mean, I'm sure you have long days as a teacher, but if you're doing something you love, you may get tired, but it's not, but it's still fun.
yeah,
I mean, when you're doing it's not work.
no, and I always say that if you can find a job and you do what you love, you're not going to work.
Yeah.
You're doing the job that you enjoy. But if
I
you
mean,
don't,
let's be honest, some days it's work, but
yeah, sure.
listen, overall it's a pretty I don't know, it's a pretty lucky opportunity. So
But
anyway,
don't,
that sounds great. I would love to do that.
sure. And don't get in that rut where you're at the job that you can't get out of and you dislike, and you didn't listen to the advice that someone told you, because it gets tougher and tougher the longer you're around in that job. And it affects your health, it affects your outlook, it affects a lot of things. And I say that to
Sure.
kids all the time: do the things you love, follow your passion. So one or two more things about your book.
Great.
When you were young, did you read anything in the style in which you now write? Did you look at that and say, I'm going to go back and I'm going to write 11 as so and so wrote his or her book?
Not consciously. I'm trying to think about the kind of books that I liked. I liked, I like, I have always liked, even as an adult, books with stories that move. I am not a good navel gazer. So when I was a kid, I liked sort of pulpy mystery fiction books. There was a whole series of books called it was sort of like a knockoff Hardy Boys. It was called the Three Investigators series. And it was presented by Alfred Hitchcock. I think it was one of those things where the publishing house had a stable of authors who would write these things. But it was about these three boys who had one of them had an uncle who had a junkyard, and so these three boys in the very back corner of the junkyard had piled up junk in a way that hid their secret detective office. And they ran a detective service out of the back of this junkyard, and they would solve like local mysteries. And each of the three characters had kind of different attributes. One of them was athletic, one of them was very social, and one of them was the chubby one was the brains. And I was kind of a chubby kid growing up, so I always related to him. I love those books. They were fun. They were escapism. They were good storytelling. They let me kind of do sort of, role playing as a hero in a way that I, couldn't be in real life. They were really fun. I also particularly remember loving Jack London growing up. It may be partly because of growing up in Texas. It would be hard to get much more exotic than, Alaska and the Yukon.
Yeah.
Especially on and there's one memory, I sometimes tell kids about this. One very specific memory I have of reading Call of the Wild. And it was on a very hot Texas summer day. And it was this moment in the book where there's a blizzard, and the dogs and the musher have to dig a snow cave in order to huddle up and maintain their body warmth. And, the wind is howling, the snow's blowing sideways. And I was reading this on this hot summer day, and I shivered. And I kind of came out of the book when I did and realized like where I was versus what I was reading, and where I was wasn't where I was. I was in Alaska shivering in a snow cave with these sled dogs. And, you know, I love the adventure, but that was kind of there was sort of a light bulb moment there where I was like, oh, a book did that. Words on a page kind of changed my reality in
Yeah.
the moment. And I think that was the thing that woke me up to the power of books. I was not a prodigy as a writer. I came to it kind of late. Um, I think I never, it's funny, what I've learned is what makes you a writer is that you write. It's that simple. But I think often we assign a lot of pressure and a lot of pressure to labels. And so I never thought of myself as a writer. A writer is something that somebody else is, somebody with special skills and talents. And I didn't know any writers or artists in my family. It just felt foreign and alien. And it took me a long time. It just sounds strange, but it's weird how our brains work. It took me a long time to give myself permission to try to be a writer, because it felt like I was pretending to be something I was not.
Okay.
What I've come to discover, they call this imposter syndrome. And what I've come to discover is that almost every writer and artist that I know struggles with imposter syndrome. And you learn to sort of ignore it after a while. It's the little voice that tells you that the very next thing I write is the one that people are going to read, and the scales will fall from their eyes. And suddenly they'll be like, what was I thinking? This guy has no talent. How has he been passing himself off as a writer all these years? That is a voice that every writer and artist has, that we all learn to like silence in order to get the work done. And what most of us who have ongoing careers in the arts learn to do is to focus on the work and the process. And the process is that, you're going to write bad first drafts, and then you're going to do the work of rewriting to make them better. And that's been sort of my long way into, how did I even get off in this? This is my conversation has been going like that. I think I'm left the room and gone into the living room now, but it was a long way around to getting to the point where I was like, stick my hand in the air proudly and say, yes, I'm a writer. That's what I do.
Now, final question before we do a wrap up on part one.
Mm.
You held an amazing event. You were part of organizing an amazing event one day before the 20th anniversary of 9/11 in New York City. And it was an event that I was honored to be invited to. I was fortunate enough to be able to take the day. My principal told me, take the full day, go in, relax, and pay tribute to the folks at 9/11. So can you talk a little bit about what the idea was behind that event, and how you and your colleagues saw that event making another connection? We talked about connections early on, and I think that was as much a connection as anything. And I was very impressed.
Well, I mean, the genesis of it goes kind of back about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. My book was published in 2014, and then 2016 was the 15th anniversary of 9/11. And I think there were 4 middle grade and YA books about 9/11 that were released that year. I may have the number wrong, maybe it's been a couple more, but um, one of the authors of those books, Nora Baskin, reached out to me at one point because we were sort of all circling one another. We were meeting with teachers and discovering like we had done school visits with the same teachers, or that we were connecting with the same people on Twitter, or we'd be commenting on the same threads about middle grade literature. And, on Amazon, if you went to look up her book, my book popped up at the bottom as, people also enjoy, and it would list, 3 books, mine would be one. Same thing. When I looked for my book, her book would pop up. And so she reached out at a certain point, and it was really impressive when she did. And she and I were just talking about this the other day, that she felt at first an instinctive twinge of jealousy. somebody else wrote a middle school book about 9/11. They're in my space. And when I heard that these other books were coming out, I had the exact same reaction. It's, I'm not proud of it, but it's just kind of a normal human reaction. And then she said, she kind of caught herself and said, be bigger than this. And be bigger than this because it's the right thing to do. That really is like the 90% reason why we connected. We also realized that, the rising tide lifts all boats. Once we connected, we began to have access to each other's, teacher networks and the word of mouth network. And we talked each other's books up to the other people we were talking to. I mean, I'm doing it right now. Not in not trying to be sales people, but just because we're all part of this effort. None of us wrote 9/11 books to get rich. That's we're all part of this effort to teach kids, to talk to kids, to help them grow in their understanding of the world and in their emotional learning. And we've read each other's books. We love each other's books. We think that, and we know that kids, if they read a book about a subject and it captures their fancy, they want to read everything about that subject. And so you want to be there with suggestions for kids about other things to read. So that's the long way into, I connected with Nora Baskin and Gay Polisner, just basically through like a Twitter and email chain. And then we put together an event that year, I believe it was that year, with the same host, a woman named Susie Rollander, who runs an organization now called startover.com. Her current effort is to help people who are making big changes in their lives. But she has been an educator. She's an educational professional. She works closely with Bank Street in New York. She was on the board there for many years. She works closely with the Churchill School, which deals with kids with special educational needs. And as we all got to talking, we sort of realized we wanted to do something special that year to commemorate the 15th anniversary. So we did a similar kind of thing then, a gathering of educators, librarians, teachers, just to commemorate the event and to, offer people these resources as educators. And so with the 20th anniversary rolling around, we knew we wanted to try to do something similar. But really this time to put our focus, we had tried to get more media people there the last night. We really just wanted our focus to be exclusively on educators, librarians. So we had some people there from the New York Public Library. The head children's librarian was there. And the librarian from the Bronx. We had a bunch of teachers that I know from New Jersey were able to come, some friends from New York. I know you spent some time with a librarian that I love from Massapequa, yes. Lori. And it was just, we all felt that, I had to fly back to New York to attend this thing. And, it was a bit of an effort to put on, but we all felt we can't unfortunately, Nora had a conflict and couldn't join us, but she was there in spirit. In fact, last night we just did an event with the Harrison Public Library in Westchester, an online event. So we continue to do things together. We continue to support one another. But we just felt like, for the 20th anniversary, we needed to do something to acknowledge, this big anniversary and acknowledge it at a time when people were paying attention again. There's a way for the 17th or the 5th, or 6th anniversary to kind of slide under the radar. But for whatever reason, we're sort of programmed, when the odometer rolls over to 0, we're programmed to sort of pay attention again. So it seemed like an opportunity to pay our respects, to give an opportunity for people like you to come meet other people like you, for all of us to share our resources and our enthusiasm, really. Honestly, I think, and you can speak for yourself, but I know I came away from that event feeling like I'd gotten a huge shot in the arm of, commitment and enthusiasm and shared mission. And I feel like that was exactly what we hoped it would be. So it's been, 10 days and I'm still over the moon about it.
It was one of the finest events that I've been to because it wasn't done in a commercialized sense. it was done from the heart. And you could tell as soon as you walked in. There's a feel for when you walk in. You walk into a school, you know if it's a good school or not in the first 30 seconds or so, because you can feel it. You walk into someone's home, you know what the tone is in that home in the first 30 seconds or so, because you can feel it. And it was the same way at that event. So I know that everyone there greatly appreciated the wisdom of bringing us together, giving us that opportunity to not only commiserate on 9/11, to support each other on 9/11, the eve of 9/11, but to also look to expand our work and touch as many other lives as we could. So for that, we're all very grateful. And
we're grateful to you. Without you guys, none of this happens.
we hope to be able to bring people together for similar purposes more times. And you know that you can reach out to any of us who were there at any time, and we would support those efforts. Because again, I look at people's faces, I look at the expressions, and there was a genuine collective expression of thanks, of gratitude, of appreciation. And we could see the time and the effort that went into putting that together. When you go somewhere, you don't always recognize just how much goes on behind the scenes. That's the toughest part. People don't always realize that.
You should have been there getting Gay's texts the day before from Costco going, do I get the homemade guacamole? Which wine should I, how much Sauvignon Blanc? What the details.
Yeah, it's all those things that get taken care of. And it's wonderful, because when the event happens, it's no longer hectic. Now you have the time to enjoy each other and to celebrate.
Well, it was a special day. I'm so thrilled you could be there.
Well, thank you. We celebrated our commonality, and we memorialized our losses, and we reflected on what we all need to do moving forward. And that was as important as anything.
Fabulous.
Tom, I'm going to pretty much call an end to part one, because I don't want your schedule to come crashing down on you. I know that you've got a few things to do, but I do want to talk to you more about the animation side of what you do, and maybe just slip in a little bit more about the writing. So
for sure.
I want to say, for part one, thank you very much, and then I'll do a close. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Well, that concludes our journey for this day of part one of this podcast with Tom Rogers. And tune in again for more conversations with authors of interest, especially part two, when Tom and I sit down again and we continue our conversation. For An Author's Journey, I'm your host, Joe Pizzo. Have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you on part two.